In my history, I've called myself a chocoholic, not really understanding how true of a statement I was actually making, because for me it was just a joke. I can still remember being less than 10 years old, scouring the kitchen looking for something to eat, something to snack on. And because my parents didn't buy a lot of junk food, and I wanted chocolate for some, and I remember that. I remember specifically wanting chocolate. I would sometimes eat the powder that you use to make hot chocolate. The question that I have is, how does a kid who grows up in a house where there aren't a lot of snacks, so we weren't snacking all the time, end up with this huge focus on eating junk food, and especially wanting chocolate when it's like the rarest thing that was in our house? I think to really understand this, we're going to need to look at the difference between me thinking I love chocolate and being addicted to chocolate. There are 11 criteria to determine whether or not someone would be classified as addicted, according to the DSM-5, which is the Diagnostic and Statistic Manual of Mental Disorders, edition number 5. If you have 2 or 3 of these criteria, you'd be considered mildly addicted. 4 to 5 would be considered moderately addicted, and anything over 6, you are severely addicted. To make things more interesting, let's see how many criteria I actually have to say yes to. So the first one is, have I ever taken the substance in larger amounts or for a longer period of time than I wanted to? In my career of eating chocolate, I can definitely say that I've eaten amounts that I find embarrassing. So I've eaten more than I intended to eat. And I've had occasions where I said, I'm not eating chocolate anymore, and yet somehow still ended up eating chocolate. Number 2, wanting to cut down or stop using the substance. If I was eating chocolate, I was overeating it. And when I wanted to stop eating it, I still somehow allowed other chocolate things there. So I wouldn't buy chocolate bars, but then I could have chocolate chip cookies, chocolate croissants, still drinking hot chocolate, still eating hot chocolate cake, still having chocolate in my life, despite the fact that I'm not eating chocolate bars. So the question is, did I actually stop eating it? The third one is spending a lot of time getting, using, or recovering from using the substance. So since my parents didn't actually buy chocolate, I did spend a lot of time getting it, because as soon as I had allowance and I was able to, leave the house and do what I wanted to do, some of my trips were to the corner store or to the grocery store to buy chocolate, which meant, since I didn't drive at the time because I'm a teenager, I was taking my bike, going to the store, getting these things. So actually, time that I could have been devoting to friends and doing activities, I was devoting to buying chocolate. It doesn't take long to eat, so that wasn't taking a lot of my time. And recovering from it, today I would say that I spent a lot of time recovering from it. I just didn't know. Because, in fact, the joint pains and all the aches I've had in my body from eating too much sugar, well, a lot of that was chocolate covered sugar. So I'd have to say yes. So this one is interesting to me because personally, I would say yes to this. But if you were to be talking to a psychologist or psychiatrist and you told them that you swang by the store to pick up some chocolate before you went home, they probably wouldn't say that that's you using a lot of time to feed your addiction. So this is one where I'm going to let you guys decide. Do you think I should say yes to this? I do, but according to a psychologist, I probably would get no for this. So I'm going to put no, but I want your opinion. Number 4 is, do you have cravings and urges to use the substance? I will definitely tell you that all the time, all the time, all the time. If I didn't have it in the house, that would get me to leave to go get it. And I also remember when my daughter was little, if I hadn't bought any chocolate and she's sleeping, how frustrated I would be that she's sleeping and I can't go get any. So yeah, I had cravings. The 5th one is not being able to do your responsibilities. So you're not doing what you're supposed to do at work, at home, or in your relationships because of the substance use. Luckily for me, this one did not impact me. I was able to do my responsibilities at work, home, and school. Now, did eating chocolate have an impact on how I carried them out? I will say yes, it did, because I remember being exhausted and falling asleep in the afternoons at work. And considering that every single day, part of my lunch routine was some kind of chocolatey dessert, whether it was a granola bar with chocolate chips in it or straight up chocolate bar. So that fatigue that I experienced, which I now know today was partially the sugar that I was eating, it did have an impact. So again, I'm leaving it up to you guys. Is that another tick or not? The sixth one is continuing to use the substance even though you know it's causing problems in your social life or your work life. And for this one, I'm going to say no, because I did not know that it was causing these problems. And so therefore I wasn't using it despite knowing that information. Number 7 is giving up important social, work, or recreational activities because of use. I have to say yes to this one because I absolutely knew that eating chocolate wasn't healthy, was causing my weight gain. And my weight gain did impede me from doing things with friends or doing activities like recreational activities that I might have wanted to do that involved perhaps putting on a bathing suit. And so, yes, it did stop me from doing certain things, and I kept using. Using the substance over and over again, despite it putting you in danger, and you know that it's putting you in danger, I'm going to say no to this one because, again, I had no clue that eating chocolate was causing anything more than overweight, and I had no clue that being overweight was a health concern that I could be in trouble with. So that 70 pounds that I was walking around carrying later in life, I didn't know that that was dangerous for me. I also want to point out that I never had a doctor say to me that the weight that I was carrying at that point in time was dangerous. They always said, oh, you should lose weight because you don't want to have problems later in life. But never really saying that even this weight you're carrying is a sign of metabolic issues. I've never been told that. The ninth one is continuing to use even though you know you have a psychological or physiological issue that could be made worse by your use. And I'm saying yes to this one because personally, I saw my weight as a problem. Personally, I wanted it to change, but I kept eating chocolate, knowing that it was contributing to my weight problem. Number 10 is needing more and more of the substance in order to get the same impact that you were getting before. Saying yes to this right away. I didn't start off eating 2 chocolate bars or even more than that in one sitting. So the fact that I was able to do that and got to that level talks about the fact that there was a tolerance that was being created and I was pushing past it over and over and over again. The 11th criteria, you would only know if you try to stop using the substance because it's living withdrawal. I'm going to say yes to that because 4 years ago when I took my sugar count down from 300-ish grams of carbs per day to about 35 grams of carbs per day, I lived very intense, uncomfortable withdrawal symptoms. So if you're keeping track, that was 7 criteria that I had, which would mean that I was severely addicted. I'm curious, were you keeping track for yourself as well? How many did you have? Now, the chasing that I was doing, which clearly started when I was a child, it started because of the food that I was eating in my household. But there wasn't a lot of junk. So then what was I eating? Or was that little bit of junk that I was getting enough to cause this problem? And actually, if you look at the food, so the meals that I was eating, we get a bit more of a understanding of why I was in so much trouble. First of all, when my mom makes a plate for a kid, that plate looks like it's for a young adult. So I remember just the huge size of meals that I was expected to eat, and I still see them till today. So large amounts of food. And then what kind of food is it? As a child, I could easily have received 3 cups of rice, which is 123 grams of carbohydrate, about 2 servings of pasta on my plate as a kid, which would be 86 grams of carbohydrate, or 2 large potatoes and 2 carrots, which would be about 142 grams of carbs on my plate. All of this beside a normal kid portion of meat. Now, keep in mind that on the days that I had pasta or rice, in the gravy, there was very likely potatoes and carrots to make the gravy taste nice. So there's still a bit more carb than what I'm counting, and onions and all kinds of other spices. My lunches were often sandwiches with an apple. So if I take a typical meal, with some juice, that would be 92 grams of carbs. My breakfast usually would have been some cereal. So if I take the best cereal that we typically bought, so the lowest sugar added cereal would have been Weetabix, knowing the amount that I normally had and the sugar I normally put on it and the milk that I normally use, that came to about 96 grams of carbs. That means that if I look at my most conservative supper and the lunch and breakfast I typically would have had, my day as a kid is around 300, just shy of 300 grams of carbs in a day. I haven't added the 2 snacks that I would have had, which likely would have been a healthy granola bar, some healthy yogurt, or some nuts, because my mom liked nuts. There's always nuts in the house. At this point, can we see why I was so addicted? And I happened to hone in on chocolate, right? That was my preference. The same way that we all have our favorite drink when we go to the bar. But at the end of the day, if that drink's not available, you'll take something else, which is what I was doing. If there wasn't chocolate available, I still had something else. And even if I couldn't get my hands on a snack, by the time supper came around, I was going to get my fix. I think that most of us watching this video would be classified as addicted to sugar if you're eating a standard American diet right now. That there's some foods that you know that you chase, and that if you were to look at it through the lens of those 11 criteria, you would be more than 2 at least. And I believe that those of us who have transitioned to low carb understand that we did go through withdrawal. And by going through withdrawal, in order to go through withdrawal, I have to be addicted. I want to tell you a little story. A few years ago, before I did keto, I was so fed up of having sandwiches growing up that as an adult, I said, I'm not eating any more bread. So I'm walking through my adult world. I don't eat bread. I go to friends' houses. I go to restaurants. And every time somebody sees me refuse bread and they would ask me, oh, why don't you want any bread? And I say, I don't eat bread. The reaction that I got of confusion, questions, and sometimes pure hatred and disdain for the fact that I would even utter those words, because I personally didn't want to eat bread. And I'm not saying I cut out all baked goods. I was still eating pizza. I was still eating like chocolate cakes and what. I just wasn't eating one thing: bread. Hatred towards me. But interestingly enough, before that decision, for years, I have not eaten red meat. And when I tell people I don't eat red meat, oh, okay, yeah, no reaction whatsoever. What else can I make for you? Was usually what I heard. What's the difference? Meat doesn't activate the pleasure center of the brain, but bread does. When you see people vehemently reacting to not eating bread or not eating potatoes or not eating rice or any of these things because they can't comprehend how their brain just reacts to that, right? That not having my addiction, and we don't even realize it's happening because we can hide it in this idea that, but it's a healthy starch or it's a healthy grain or it's not. It's sugar. And you're reacting because someone's trying to, is like, I don't drink alcohol, and you get that reaction, right? As I've had that reaction too on occasions now when I say I don't drink alcohol. Really? Oh, what's wrong with you? You're an alcoholic? Maybe I just don't feel like having alcohol today. The reason you love junk food is because you're mistaking your addiction for desire. When that part of your brain goes off, and you need to get it, you're not allowing yourself to see that that's addiction pushing your behavior. And you're hiding behind this idea that I just like it. I love it. It's my favorite thing. Please look at that a bit more deeply. You are out of control and ingesting a toxic substance, and it's ruining your health. And that's a bold statement, I know, but think about it like this. We've all known alcoholics and smokers whose health was on the line, and when they left the hospital, went back to drinking, back to smoking. Their life on the line, just out of surgeries, back to drinking, back to smoking. The only thing that was stopping them from using was the fact that they were in the hospital and couldn't get it. And now we are the ones with weight to lose, diabetes, insulin resistance, painful joints, who refuse to even consider letting go of sugar to solve this problem, these problems. So we either love pain and struggling, or we are living an undiagnosed addiction. Eventually, I had to acknowledge that I didn't really love chocolate or cookies or any other junk food. I was addicted and out of control. If you want to get your health and weight under control, I'm going to suggest that you watch this video about how changing your diet can end your cravings forever. Click on the link and I'm going to meet you over there. If you're still watching, I want to share this with you. We don't connect eating the wrong thing and illness. So we go to see our doctor and they solve one problem and they just wait for us to come back so they can solve the other problem, and wait for us to come back to the other problem, when all of the problems could have been solved by telling us to eat better, to put sugar down, because it's causing these metabolic issues that you're living.